Jesus went up into the hills and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12, designating them apostles, that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. These are the 12 he appointed: Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter; James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. To them he gave the name Boanerges, which means sons of thunder; Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Today we remember these men and their actions leading up to the crucifixion of Jesus. While Jesus was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them: "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him." Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus replied, "Friend, do what you came for." Then the men stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. Judas betrayed him. Matthew's account of the arrest of Jesus concludes with some telling words. Matthew says, "Then all the disciples deserted him and fled." Do you hear that? Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. The first real friend that Jesus had was Andrew, and the strength he showed was primarily strength of character. Like Peter, his brother, with whom he worked, Andrew was a fisherman on the Sea of Galilee. Andrew was called the introducer, for it was he who introduced his brother to Jesus, as soon as he knew that this was the true Messiah. Andrew brought before Jesus the little boy with the loaves and fishes when Jesus fed the 5,000. It was Andrew that introduced the first of the Greeks to Jesus. Andrew is a Greek name and means manly. He seems to have had a quiet strength of character and a helpfulness on which the others could always rely. But Andrew ran away. Bartholomew's name appears on the list of the apostles given in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and in the Acts of the Apostles. In each list, his name is associated with Philip. John's Gospel does not mention the name Bartholomew at all, but does say that Philip brought Nathanael to Jesus. This, coupled with the fact that each of the New Testament lists of the apostles associates Bartholomew with Philip, has led many to believe that Nathanael and Bartholomew are one and the same persons. Bartholomew, or Nathanael, was one of the first 6 men chosen as a disciple by Jesus, who recognized him as a man of vision and imagination. Philip bade him come and see when he had come to Christ, and was convinced. He declared, "Thou art the Son of God. Thou art King of Israel." But Bartholomew ran away. John was known as the beloved disciple. John represents the highest power and the strongest Christian quality: love. He was the son of the fisherman, Zebedee, and he and his brother James, once called sons of thunder, were strong, brave men who sailed the sea in little fishing boats in stormy as well as good weather. John and his brother James received their call to Jesus' service as they mended their nets in their fishing boat. Their response to this call was immediate. Leaving their father Zebedee in the boat with the men he employed, they followed Jesus to spend the rest of their lives as fishers of men. But John ran away. Jude was certainly one of the original 12, but it is not known in what manner he became a disciple of Jesus. John's gospel, or Luke's gospel, and the Acts of the Apostles list him as Jude, but Matthew and Mark call him Thaddeus. There is little doubt, however, that it is the same person. The Apostle Jude is preserved from complete obscurity by the Gospel of John, which records a question he put to Jesus after the Last Supper. On that occasion, in his instruction to the apostles, Jesus promised to manifest himself to those who loved him. This seemed to puzzle Jude, so he asked Jesus, "Why manifest yourself only to those who love you? Why not manifest yourself to the whole world?" In reply, Jesus taught that love was the key to understanding all he said and did. Some believe that Jude was of the family of Jesus. But Jude ran away. The New Testament tells us nothing of Thomas's background, nor of the circumstances and occasion of his call to Jesus' ministry. His name is Aramaic, and in Aramaic and Hebrew means twin, for which the Greek equivalent is Didymus, a name by which he was also known. It was Thomas who, on occasion, would show intense loyalty and bravery. When Jesus had decided to make the dangerous journey from beyond the Jordan to go to the help of his friend Lazarus, the disciples tried to dissuade him, for they were sure that his enemies would capture him and kill him. But Thomas said to them, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." But in the end, Thomas ran away. Like most of the disciples, Matthew, at one time called Levi, was a native of Galilee, a publican or tax collector. Matthew was a well-educated and a wealthy man who had more worldly goods to give up than most of the other disciples. As a group, tax collectors were generally grasping and greedy. It is not surprising that the Jews disliked them and refused to associate with them in commerce or at religious worship. To his fellow Jews, then, Matthew was decidedly a social outcast. Yet Jesus, who looked into men's hearts and judged them for what they truly were, called this social outcast to be in his ministry. And when called, Matthew arose, forsook all that he had, and followed Jesus. But Matthew, in the end, ran away. James the Less, or James the son of Alphaeus, he was called James the Less because he was younger than James, the brother of John. And since he is spoken of as James the son of Alphaeus, in the Bible many scholars believe that this man may have been a cousin of Jesus. But, relative or not, James the Less ran away. James was a fisherman and fished with his father Zebedee and his brother John. Jesus called James and John to his service when they mended their nets in their fishing boat by the shore of the Sea of Galilee. Mark's gospel tells us that Jesus named James and John the sons of thunder because it is said of their fiery temper. He had occasion to rebuke them at times. Once they asked Jesus if he wanted them to call down fire on a Samaritan village that would not receive Jesus and his disciples. Another time, they made the ambitious request that they be given places at the right and left hand of Jesus in his coming glory. Correcting their false attitudes, Jesus taught them that his kingdom required meekness and humility. True greatness for a Christian consists in being a servant of all. But in the end, James ran away. Because he knew the Greek language so well, Philip was called the Greek. But he was of Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter, and he lived in Galilee, as they did. Philip, a powerful and vital man, was among the first to join the band of men as a chosen disciple of Jesus. It was Philip who brought Nathanael, or Bartholomew, to Jesus. Philip used the power of the word, as he and the other disciples were empowered to do. Healed the sick, cast out unclean spirits. His difficulty in understanding the spiritual meaning of Jesus' message at times did not seem to hinder his powerful message to bring that message to others. But in the end, Philip ran away. Simon the Zealot. He had been of the Zealot sect, a rebel party, heirs to the fighting spirit of the Maccabees. They looked onto taxation as slavery and thought their purpose was a righteous one, since they wanted no other rule but God. They had not learned the folly of using their zeal in the unrighteous way of violence. Simon, who represents the fiery zealot with a cause, did finally become gentle and loving through his association with Jesus and the other disciples. There can be no doubt that after Simon gave his allegiance to Jesus, tempered his zeal with justice, charity, and prudence, which are virtues which characterize the teachings of Jesus. But still, at the arrest of Jesus, Simon the Zealot ran away. Jesus called Peter the rock, a symbol of strong, immovable faith. As Jesus said, "Upon this rock I will build my church." Peter was a prosperous fisherman when he was called to follow Jesus. In the beginning, his nature was fiery and impulsive. Throughout Jesus' ministry, we find Simon Peter exercising his leadership qualities with characteristic energy and initiative. Peter was so confident when Jesus told him that he would deny knowing him. Peter said, "Even if everyone else deserts you, I never will. Not even if I have to die with you, I will never deny you." But he did. After the third denial, Luke records, the Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word that the Lord had spoken to him, and Peter went outside and wept bitterly. Peter denied knowing Jesus. Very early in the morning, the chief priests with the elders, the teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin reached a decision. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. "Are you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate. "Yes, it is as you say," Jesus replied. The chief priests accused him of many things. So again, Pilate asked him, "Aren't you going to answer? See how many things they are accusing you of?" But Jesus still had no reply, and Pilate was amazed. Now it was the custom at the feast to release a prisoner whom the people requested. A man called Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. "Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate, knowing it was out of envy that the chief priests had handed Jesus over to him. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd, to have Pilate release Barabbas instead. "What shall I do then with the one you call the King of the Jews?" Pilate asked them. "Crucify him," they shouted. "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. The soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, that is, the praetorium, and together with the whole company of soldiers, they put a purple robe on him, then wore a crown of thorns and set it on him. And they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Again and again they struck him on the head with a staff and spit on him. Falling on their knees, they worshipped him. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. So all of the disciples ran away. Oh, but we say they were only human. The difficulty of the night, the fear of the mob that evening, we understand why they ran. We human beings are very complex beings. In one sense, we are creaturely. That's a way of saying that we're mere animals. Humanity has all the systems that other animals have: digestive, reproductive, circulatory, pulmonary. And our bodies die just like all other animals, and in death return to dust from which they came. If that is all we have to say about humanity, there would be no need for the sacrifice Jesus made. See, it's not sinful for an animal to do what comes naturally. If we watch television animal adventure shows, it may be hard for us to see lions killing antelopes or to see what bald eagles feed their young, but it is not sinful for them. But we human beings are also spiritual. And in our spiritual existence, we do not always choose right over wrong. The disciples all lived for 3 years with Jesus, but they still all ran away. In these moments of Good Friday, when we remember the failure of the disciples, we must remember ours as well. All of their sins, all of our sins lead to the cross. Because in a sense, we were there when they crucified him. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. Here they crucified him and with 2 others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. The chief priests of the Jews protested to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be King of the Jews." Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, one for each of them, with the undergarment remaining. This garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. "Let's not tear it," they said to one another. "Let's decide by lot who will get it." This happened that the scripture might be fulfilled, which said, "They divided my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing." So this is what the soldiers did. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary of Magdala. That's John's recording of the crucifixion. Luke concludes with these words. "It was now about the 6th hour, and darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour, for the sun stopped shining, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Jesus called out with a loud voice, 'Father, into your hands I commit my spirit.' And when he had said this, he breathed his last." Today, remember what he has done for you, for me. And I pray that God will bless you now as we await the power of the resurrection. So be it until we join together Easter morning. Amen.